Buenos días a todos y a todas, es un gusto saludarlos. Soy la doctora Adriana Margarita Arias Vallejo y a nombre del comité organizador del Coloquio de Avances de Investigación 2021-1 y como responsable del programa de Maestría y Doctorado en Planeación y Desarrollo Sustentable de la Universidad Autónoma de Baja California, les damos la más cordial bienvenida a esta sesión virtual inaugural. Este coloquio tendrá lugar a dos actividades importantes. La primera de ellas es presenciar la conferencia magistral impartida por el profesor Jack Ahern, titulada Strategies for Building Urban Resilience, dirigida a alumnos, docentes, investigadores y público interesado en la planeación urbano y regional desde un enfoque holístico y sustentable. Esta conferencia será transmitida por las redes sociales de Facebook y YouTube de la Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño. Y la segunda actividad, la cual dará inicio a las 10:30 horas de este día, es la presentación de avances del proyecto de tesis de los alumnos del programa de Maestría y Doctorado en Planeación y Desarrollo Sustentable. Esta actividad se llevará a cabo como evento privado, utilizando la plataforma Google Meet, respaldada por los correos institucionales de UABC. Asimismo, este evento tiene como base lo establecido en las actividades académicas del proceso de seguimiento y permanencia del programa, evaluado por un foro amplio y diverso de evaluadores internos y externos, especialistas en las distintas líneas de investigación del programa, las cuales son planeación urbano-regional, paisaje regional y urbano, y perspectivas sociales del desarrollo. Ay, discúlpenme. Es un gusto contar con la presencia de nuestros distinguidos invitados y autoridades académicas de este programa. En primer lugar, a el doctor Alejandro José Peinberg Duarte, director de la Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño, a la doctora Fabiola Maribel de Negri de Dios, directora del Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales, la doctora Cristina Sotelo Salas, coordinadora de posgrados de la Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño, el cuerpo de académicos, comunidad estudiantil y público en general. Para inaugurar formalmente este coloquio, dirigirá unas palabras de bienvenida el doctor Alejandro José Peinberg Duarte, a quien cedo la palabra.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenos días. Agradezco a las y a los colegas que se encuentran en este acto inaugural y que ya han sido debidamente presentados. Saludo particularmente a mi colega, la doctora Fabiola de Negri de Dios, directora del Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales. Doy la calurosa bienvenida al profesor Jack Ahern, conferencista magistral en el marco de este coloquio. Muchas gracias por aceptar la invitación por parte de nuestra facultad y por abrir espléndidamente este encuentro académico. Professor Ahern, thank you very much for accepting this invitation from our school and our postgraduate program, and for splendidly opening this academic meeting with your keynote lecture. This school, students and teachers, we respect your work, and personally I am your follower at ResearchGate. Be totally welcome. Mis parabienes para la comunidad estudiantil y docente de nuestros programas de maestría, doctorado en planeación y desarrollo sustentable. Celebramos especialmente que están egresando una generación de doctorado para trabajar como tesistas en los siguientes meses. Saludo con mucho entusiasmo a todos aquellos que están siguiendo esta transmisión a través de nuestras redes sociales. Para las unidades académicas que compartimos este programa, es importante refrendar la encomienda que tiene tanto con la Universidad Autónoma de Baja California, así como con las comunidades de nuestro estado y nuestra región, en formar profesionales e investigadores a través de programas reconocidos por su calidad. Igualmente, es nuestro compromiso promover encuentros académicos que, además de dar seguimiento a la trayectoria de nuestros alumnos de posgrado, consoliden la presencia y la proyección de nuestra universidad más allá de nuestro ámbito. Alumnos de cada una de las tres líneas que comprenden maestría y doctorado estarán presentando sus avances ante directores de tesis y asesores del claustro de este programa. A los alumnos, además de desearle el mejor de los éxitos en sus exposiciones, quisiera animarlos a que sigan comprometidos con sus proyectos, a que sigan comprometidos con los docentes que los han acompañado en su formación así como con las instituciones que nos brindan la oportunidad de coincidir en esa experiencia. Me refiero a la UABC y al CONACYT. Sabemos que las condiciones que nos ha impuesto la crisis sanitaria representan un reto aún mayor y por eso mi sincero reconocimiento. A los profesores, mi felicitación y agradecimiento también por su alto nivel de responsabilidad, por aportar sus conocimientos y experiencias, por su valioso trabajo y porque igualmente no ha sido nada sencillo operar bajo modalidades y esquemas con los cuales no estamos habituados. A propósito de este agradecimiento, quiero hacer especial mención de nuestros compañeros, el doctor Guillermo Benjamín Álvarez de la Torre y el doctor Jorge Augusto Arredondo Vega, ya que cada uno de ellos ha decidido concluir sus labores en unas semanas más dentro de la UABC al iniciar su proceso de jubilación. Queridos colegas, ambos, muchas gracias por todo lo que aportaron a la UABC, al instituto, a la facultad, al programa. Éxito en sus planes, proyectos y metas siguientes. Este coloquio nos anuncia el cierre de un ciclo escolar, momento en el que todos resentimos el esfuerzo de varios meses, pero también momento en el que reflexionamos, nuestros alumnos, sobre su aprendizaje, lo que alcanzaron a lograr y lo que quedó pendiente, profesores y directores de tesis, sobre el crecimiento de sus discípulos y sobre los ajustes que habrían de implementar en los alcances o en los niveles de exigencia. A todos, deseo que disfruten del periodo vacacional, que sea reparador, que les brinde energía, inspiración y en general bienestar para ustedes y sus familias. Hace un momento hablaba de la proyección y presencia que la UABC logra con estos encuentros. Esa proyección y la presencia de la UABC, especialmente del Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales y de la Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño que ofrece este programa, se hace patente con la conferencia magistral que a partir de esta edición de Coloquio de la Maestría en Planeación y Desarrollo Sustentable se transmite de manera abierta para generar y contar con un público más amplio. Y bien, sin más preámbulo y con mucho gusto, siendo las 9:07 de la mañana de este 18 de junio de 2021, declaro formalmente inaugurado el Coloquio de Avances 2021-1 de la Maestría y Doctorado en Planeación y Desarrollo Sustentable. Mucho éxito en esta jornada, muchas gracias por su atención y excelente día para todos.
Agradecemos estas cordiales palabras de bienvenida y de entusiasmo para los estudiantes por parte del doctor Alejandro Painberg y damos paso con ello a nuestra conferencia magistral titulada Strategies for Building Urban Resilience, impartida por el profesor Jack Ahern de la Universidad de Massachusetts, a quien le damos la bienvenida y agradecemos su disposición al participar en este evento. We appreciate these cordial words from Dr. Alejandro Painberg, and we now present our master conference entitled Strategies for Building Urban Resilience by Professor Jack Ahern, our main guest from University of Massachusetts. Welcome, Professor, and thank you for your willingness to participate in this event. Daré lectura a una breve descripción de su trayectoria, si me lo permiten. If I may, Professor, I will read a brief description of your career. El profesor Jack Ahern es profesor emérito de Arquitectura del Paisaje de la Universidad de Massachusetts, Amherst. Estudió Arquitectura del Paisaje con Ian McCart en la Universidad de Pensilvania y en los Países Bajos con Klaas Kerstra. Investiga y escribe sobre cómo la ecología se puede aplicar en el diseño del paisaje a múltiples escalas y en diversos contextos. Actualmente está escribiendo un libro sobre diseño de paisajes ecológicos para Cape Cod y las islas en Massachusetts, Estados Unidos. También está investigando nuevos ecosistemas urbanos para comprender de mejor manera cómo la nueva naturaleza en las ciudades contemporáneas puede ser entendida y diseñada no solo para embellecer, sino para proporcionar otros servicios ecosistémicos. El profesor Ahern es consultor en prestigiosos despachos de diseño en las áreas relacionadas a la dotación y gestión de la vegetación, aportando con esto sus conocimientos hortícolas, de diseño y ecológicos para la creación y gestión de paisajes memorables. A continuación, brindamos el espacio al invitado para que inicie con la conferencia y le agradecemos nuevamente su participación. Professor Ahern, we now provide this space to you so we can start with your lecture. And we thank you once again for your participation. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Pimbert and Dr. Vallejo. It's an honor to be invited, and I look forward to sharing some ideas with you, and hopefully have some questions and discussion when I finish my presentation. Now I'm going to try to share my screen, and there we go. And okay. So good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I will speak for a little less than an hour about urban resilience from the perspective of planning and design strategies. And I understand that many of you are involved in studying urban planning and urban design for sustainability. This is an outline of my talk, starting with a few words about the urban context at this particular point in time and the role of urban planning and design in that. I will also go over some of the basic theory about resilience, which I find is often not well understood. I will be discussing an idea that I've written about called the safe to fail strategy, which is an idea to promote experiments that have a potential to generate new knowledge and that have a low risk should they fail. I will include in my lecture a number of case examples from around the world to try to illustrate how resilience can become something real and tangible that can be acted on. So starting with this idea of urbanization, I call this the 21st century's predicament. It's happening fast, and there's no way we can stop it in any country. It's the challenge of this century for sure. And the illustration shows that the world will approach 75% urban residents by the middle of the century. And at the beginning of the last century, we had only 10% and 53% about 10 years ago. So we're on a trajectory for increased urbanization around the world. And this is driven, of course, by social and economic factors. And as I mentioned, I don't think that these can be substantially reversed. China is one of the countries. It's the largest country in the world, of course. China is in the midst of an unprecedented migration from rural to urban areas. So here are the statistics. 250 million Chinese will be moving into cities in a relatively short period of time. 250 million. This is almost the population of the United States that is already in China, but will be moving into cities. Because of this urban reality, these times have been called the Anthropocene, which comes from the Latin word anthro, which means human. So this is the age of humans. The Anthropocene is the period in which humans are having an effect on the entire planet, including our climate, which we're all familiar with that. And many people think about the Anthropocene as a terrible trend and like the end of the world. I like these words from Maris, Emma Maris, and I won't read these, but these are two quotes from her book that is called Rambunctious Nature. She's talking about the idea that this urbanization is not only a problem, but it's an opportunity. And people created the predicament that we find ourselves in in cities. So therefore, we can believe that people can find the solution for it. And we can even have a more beautiful and healthy world if we work together. So, she also talks about forgetting romantic notions about a stable, balanced Earth, and be honest about the goals and the costs, and try to instill some innovative programs to address the challenges. So this is an optimistic perspective on this predicament. And in that optimism comes the idea of urban sustainability and resilience. If the world is going to be sustainable, the cities need to be sustainable, right? We have most people in the world are already living in cities. That will continue. Therefore, if we are going to achieve sustainability and resilience, it must be done in the world's cities. And this is a major change in thinking from earlier environmental policy that kind of thought of cities as places that were already severely disturbed, and that we should rather focus on protecting rural areas. So obviously, cities need to be a part of the solution. I have a few propositions or bold ideas that I'll try to integrate throughout this presentation. I believe that this situation we're in and the challenges we face provide unprecedented opportunities for design professionals, including architects, landscape architects, urban planners, and engineers. We are developing basic theory that can be applied anywhere in the world, but every place in the world is by definition unique and distinct. And place-specific knowledge is needed to achieve sustainability and resilience in every city where it will be different. We need to change the professional culture of the design professions to be one that it more embraces innovation and takes risks to try to implement bold ideas that have a promise to make a difference. In that context, transdisciplinary collaboration is essential. Transdisciplinary involves collaborations between experts, between professionals, decision makers, and very importantly, between the stakeholders and all of the residents of the city. And finally, I'll talk about safe to fail design strategy and designed experiments. So this idea of the balance of nature that we all grew up learning, an ancient belief, is basically considered to be wrong and considered to be not accurate in terms of resilience. This concept of balance of nature assumes that nature is best when people are not involved. And under this myth, people and nature are separate, and what people do is unnatural and bad. So if we're going to address this great challenge for resilience in cities, we have to move on from this idea of the balance of nature. And now we can turn to some modern science for some new theory that is challenging this idea of the balance of nature. It's not balanced. Many species are adapted to changes in natural systems, and they may even require them. And paradoxically, the way to solve nature and its problems may be to accept the changes that happen and let them occur. And in this view, what people do can be understood to be integral with nature, and therefore addressing this new idea of resilience. And we can look to the Greek god of chaos, Pan, as a great example of this alternative way of thinking. Also, chaos theory was popular at the end of the 20th century. I think this quote is very important. Expect the best, plan for the worst, and be prepared to be surprised. This is the idea of resilience. resilience is a characteristic of complex systems. We're seeing examples of this as we speak right now. A year and a half ago, no one was predicting that we would be in the middle of a global health pandemic that would be killing millions of people and disrupting the world's economies and trade and life as we know it. It's a perfect example of a chaotic event and a perfect example of the challenges that resilience presents. How to address challenges and disturbances that we cannot even expect. So this represents a paradigm shift in epistemology. Epistemology is the science of knowledge. It's about the philosophy of knowledge and the belief in knowledge and different types of knowledge. Previously, up until the mid to late 20th century, the world was in a paradigm of equilibrium. And there are some words here that describe that: predictable, rational, disciplinary, modern, linear. It's kind of the engineering approach that we can solve any problems we face by way of technology and innovation and interventions. We have moved into a non-equilibrium or chaotic paradigm where a postmodern world is inherently chaotic. It's uncertain. It's prone to disturbances. It requires transdisciplinary approaches to solve. So this idea of resilience can be best understood in this larger context of this change in epistemology from an equilibrium worldview to a non-equilibrium worldview. And when we think about sustainability in this non-equilibrium context, we get to the idea of resilience. And here, another way to express this is the old idea of fail-safe and the new idea of safe to fail. Fail-safe, as illustrated here with two posters from American movies from the 20th century, was a perfect manifestation of this idea that with technology, in this case, nuclear weapons, we could guarantee survival and peace in the world. This was the height of the Cold War when we were very close to nuclear war, and we believed that we were on the right path by having massive amounts of nuclear weapons. And now we're moving into the idea of safe to fail, because the fail-safe idea it's not achievable. It's not realistic. It can't be realized. And chaos theory and non-equilibrium theory prove that. So that brings us to the idea of resilience, the idea that a system and how it responds to disturbance or stress. And can the system retain its initial state and still experience disturbance? The illustration here is called the ball in a basin analogy. The red ball represents the current state of the system. You can imagine that this ball will roll down this hill and go up the other side. But if the system is resilient, the ball will remain in the basin and will not flip over to a different state. So this is I think the best way to understand the idea of resilience in systems. And of course, this applies to urban systems. And I will give a reference here for the Resilience Alliance, which is a very impressive group of researchers from Sweden that not only advance the theory of resilience, but also the practice of it. Urban resilience was made very popular in the United States after the big hurricane that flooded large parts of New York City about 10 years ago. Hurricane Sandy. And the American government supported a large planning and design competition for new ideas for how to protect the city from these extreme events. It's not a question of if it will happen again, it's a question of when will it happen. So this is the idea proposed by the Danish architecture firm BIG Architects to protect Lower Manhattan from the storm surge from a future hurricane, but still allowing the city to function. Another way to think about resilience is with adaptive cycles. And this is illustrated with this diagram with this figure 8 configuration, the infinity symbol, that we can start with in the lower left with the phase of exploitation and growth. This is the phase when a system is in rapid accumulation of knowledge, economic capital, biomass, and other assets that help that system to grow. As that system matures, it enters the K phase, which is the phase of conservation. In cities, this is where we say, oh, good, everything is looking great. Let's keep it that way. Why would we want to change anything? Unfortunately, disturbance happens, and that is the lower right, the omega phase. That's the disturbance. That's the pandemic, the war, the climate change, the economic collapse, you name it. Those are the disturbances and the changes in technology that take away all the industry. There's no limit to the number of changes that will affect the system and bring it into the phase of release. And then we go into the alpha phase in the top left, the phase of reorganization. And this is, if the system is resilient, it will reorganize and then will regenerate back in the phase of exploitation. So you can think of this diagram as a diagram of the 4 phases of resilience when a system is resilient. If the system is not resilient, when it goes into the omega phase, it will jump into a different condition. The city may be abandoned, the economy may collapse, the population may change. But if the system remains in a current state, it will be in this situation. This is an example. I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to talk about this example from one of the great American industrial cities of Flint, Michigan. This is the home of General Motors, the massive corporation that makes automobiles and trucks and large vehicles. So in the R phase, in the early 20th century, Flint, Michigan was a boom town. The economy was going great. They were building factories as fast as they could. They built a big modern city that you can see on the top right. It was economically successful. People had jobs. The city was growing in population. And then what happened? Well, guess what? The American cars were not so good, and the Japanese cars became very good. So the industry collapsed, and Flint, Michigan looked like the bottom right. People just left town. It was an economic disaster, unexpected. Nobody thought that the automobile industry would fail so catastrophically. And currently, Flint, Michigan is in the top right in the alpha phase. It's regenerating. Cities like Flint and Detroit and other post-industrial cities are reinventing themselves with new industries and new technologies, and hopefully these will regenerate and demonstrate the idea of a resilient system. So that's I think an example of how resilience plays out over time, and important to understand that it's not a static condition that we achieve and try to freeze it and stabilize it. but these changes will come whether we like them or not, whether we're prepared or not, whether we expect them or not. The changes will come, and then the city has the challenge to respond to that. So here I have proposed 5 strategies to build urban resilience capacity. How can urban planners and designers prepare for changes that they cannot even define or predict? So here are 5 ideas that I will go through with examples from projects around the world, starting with urban biodiversity, then including multi-scale networks and connectivity, the idea of multifunctionality, the idea of modularization and redundancy, and finally, safe-to-fail experiments and adaptive design. So biodiversity is the entirety of the diversity of living systems in the world. And we can think of 2 different types of biodiversity. Functional diversity is the range of functions that an ecosystem requires to produce food, to process waste, to do decomposition, to make nutrients available. Those are functions, and those functions are provided by different species in the natural living world. Response diversity looks at how different species and different communities of species respond to different disturbances. So having a high response diversity is key for resilience, because we can have more ways to recover from the response rather than one approach that can fail. As we know, we're going to be surprised. So urban biodiversity has been described as the library of knowledge, some of which is familiar and valued and known, but much remains to be discovered and understood. This is excellent advice for humans to take care of other species, and it's very nicely presented and illustrated in this book by Chris Reed and Nina Marie Lister. This new idea of ecology that embraces disturbance, chaos, and resilience theory. Part of this is the idea that cities are now organizing themselves into new types of ecosystems that never existed before. And these are called novel urban ecosystems. And this is, again, this is the book cover from Emma Marris' book, Rambunctious Garden. And this is the idea that maybe we should think differently about urban nature, that it's not always better to have only native species, because it's not possible in most cities. We need to learn to live with this new community of biodiversity that has moved around the world and is now present in almost every city in the world. So the novel urban ecosystems are areas that were just left over, regenerated or restored. They may result from intentional or indirect human activity. But the ecosystem composition is determined by the human-directed management or lack of management. And importantly, these new urban ecosystems provide ecosystem services that can be managed sustainably. So what does that mean, and why should humans care about biodiversity? This is an example at the microscopic level. This is a bacteria called Geobacter metalloreducens. This bacteria was discovered in contaminated sediment in the Potomac River near Washington, D.C. And this organism has amazing properties. It can oxidize carbon dioxide without the presence of oxygen. It can metabolize contaminants in groundwater. It can be used to produce methane, and it's now being used in this very advanced idea of bioelectronics to make new types of electronics that are produced and developed by natural living systems, as illustrated here with these green fibers. So here's an example of a bacteria found in a contaminated location that has the potential to provide really important and necessary functions for people in cities and to solve problems of contamination. It's one of the best examples I know of the value of biodiversity that can often be hidden to people. Why should we care about this? This is why, because it can clean up the mess we make. Another example of urban biodiversity is the species we call it mugwort. The botanical name is Artemisia vulgaris. This is a weed from Asia that is very common around most of the United States. I'm not sure if it's in Mexico. I believe it is. It's kind of the poster child of invasive urban weeds. It's very aggressive. It grows fast. It grows in really disturbed locations, and it spreads rapidly. And it's tolerant of contaminated conditions. But, and maybe not surprisingly, look what this plant can do. It has the capacity to remove heavy metals from the soil. Copper, nickel, lead, and cadmium, mugwort can take out from the soil and help to clean the soil. So here's another example of unexpected value from urban biodiversity that can be very important for resilience by helping to clean up toxic environments. This urban biodiversity is hidden. It's not recognized. It's only beginning to be understood. And here are some examples of the potential, the percent of vacant land in some U.S. cities, as high as almost 30% in Detroit. So this new spontaneous novel urban ecosystem with a new biodiversity, whether we like it or not, is here. And it provides an opportunity to manage, to provide important ecosystem services. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that. Here's another example of a spontaneous nature in Berlin, Germany. This was an interesting site that was a railroad yard before the wall went up in Berlin to separate East and West Berlin. For 50 years, this area that was very contaminated from the railroad activity was basically fenced in, and nature came in on its own, and it regenerated a very rich new flora of species that weren't present before, some of them which are rare native species. So it illustrates the potential of natural systems to regenerate and the inherent power of biodiversity. Here's another example of biodiversity in Seattle, Washington. Seattle is one of the more progressive American cities for using green infrastructure to manage stormwater for water quality and flooding. And this is a relatively new example that is a really large infiltration area in a very urban area, and it's planted with species of sedges, of carex. And this this system has the capacity to slow down the stormwater, to infiltrate the stormwater, and the plants can remove contaminants from the stormwater. Another good example of putting biodiversity to work to deliver ecosystem services in the city. So that's the first strategy for resilience, biodiversity. The next strategy is about multi-scale networks and connectivity. This is a systems concept that is planned and designed at multiple scales, as illustrated in the top diagram. Green systems around the city of Leipzig in Germany. The big idea here is connectivity. When these systems are linked, they can provide specific ecosystem services, mainly focusing on flows, movement, colonization, and dispersal of species, but also very important for water. These are sometimes called blue-green or blue-green networks. And these networks provide the capacity to recover from disturbance and to spread risks because of the connectivity. Multifunctionality is another strategy. This is the idea that when we create or protect green space in the city, it should do more than one thing. It should be more than a place for playing football. It should be more than a place for flood control. It should be a place for more than a place for urban wildlife. It should try to do as many of those functions as possible. In doing so, it becomes strategic and spatially efficient. The multifunctional can be achieved in terms of integrating functions in the same space, that's called stacking, or by time shifting of having different functions at different times of the day or the year. By having these different functions, we develop a great deal of public support. Some people like water quality, some people like biodiversity, some people like recreation. So if we can have all three of those, we have a large human constituency to support the idea, and then that community benefits from the ecosystem services. And the example of this is an alternative stormwater system in New York City called the Staten Island Blue Belt. Another example of multifunctionality is the idea of green streets. We call them in the US. Green streets are streets that are multifunctional. Of course, the main function of a street is for transportation, but it can also and should also provide other functions, including stormwater management, water quality, bicycle transportation, climate modification, air quality, aesthetics, and economics. So it's a really bold rethinking of urban infrastructure and thinking that, of course, we need streets and highways to move around, but the streets and highways can do more than just provide for transportation. The next strategy is redundancy and modularization. Don't put all the eggs in one big basket. This is the idea, if you have an electric system that's based on one source of electricity, if that source has a problem, you lose all your electricity. So by having redundant systems, one system can take over and recover and provide services if another system should fail. So this is a way to build response diversity. It's also flexible and adaptable, and it can also contain the spread of disturbance. Back in the days of equilibrium thinking, the engineering approach was one of centralization, which looked to reduce redundancy. Redundancy was formerly thought to be wasteful and unnecessary. Now we know that redundancy is essential for systems that are resilient. Here's an example of applying redundancy to a stormwater system. This is a small residential neighborhood in Berlin, Germany, where the community is taking care of its own stormwater runoff. So it's not exporting its runoff to the city system, but it's dealing with it internally. So it's separate and independent of the urban system, and it provides redundancy and backup for the drainage function to provide for resilience. Here's another example in Germany, in the middle of Berlin at Potsdamer Platz. This was when Germany was reunified. This part of the city was regenerated into a very bold, very major new commercial center. This is the headquarters of Sony Corporation in Berlin. And here they built an artificial wetland system to manage the water from this large building in a very visible way to create this wetland. Again, it's multifunctional, it's attractive, it cleans the water, it reduces flooding, and it also supports other species, and it's nice for people to look at. So it's been very successful. Another example of a multifunctional stormwater system is in Amsterdam, in a relatively new park called Westergasfabriek Park, formerly a very contaminated industrial site. It's been cleaned up and turned into a park. And here the water system is part of a biological treatment system to clean the stormwater. And I call this a 21st century fountain, right? We can't afford to have fountains that only splash water and look pretty and make interesting sounds. We need to have fountains that also clean the water, provide for wildlife habitat, and look beautiful, like I think this one does. So a nice example of multifunctionality. And the last strategy I want to speak about this morning is adaptive design and safe-to-fail design experiments. So as I've spoken earlier, a lot of these ideas to address the challenges for resilience are new. We don't have the knowledge for how to do it. So we have to learn by doing. We don't have the time to wait for scientific research to develop the perfect solutions, because by the time those experiments are completed, the city will have grown and changed, and we will need different solutions. So we need to learn how to work with uncertainty and imperfect knowledge. This kind of challenges the professional culture, excuse me, from one of conservative professionalism. This is the idea that we know how to do it. We have the references. We're going to use the methods that are tried and true, except those methods don't really work and they can't address the challenges of resilience. So design experiments represent a big opportunity for land planners and landscape architects. Here's how Felsen and Pickett define design experiments: interdisciplinary partnerships, collaborating to insert experiments into the urban mosaic, balancing ecological goals with the context, aesthetics, amenity, and safety. So this is the idea that says anything you do in the city might have a possibility to generate some new knowledge. So let's try to experiment with that in a way that has a low risk, but has a potential to discover some new knowledge. So by doing this, we can explore innovative practices with a robust research design. It opens up the possibility for design innovations and creativity. Very importantly, it needs to be monitored. We need to learn how to practice monitoring, to be systematic, to collect data after projects are born, if they work or not. This was a great failure of much of the new green technologies of the last few decades. They looked good, they sounded good, they were built, but a lot of them were not followed up on or monitored to learn if they worked or not. So monitoring gives us the possibility to gain new knowledge to apply to future projects. Here's a simple example, a rain garden bioswale, a very common piece of green infrastructure, very important for cleaning stormwater and also reducing urban flooding. So everyone who builds a rain garden says this will clean the water and this will reduce the flooding. But very few people will measure the water to see if it's actually cleaning it. So they don't know if the system is working or how well it's working. So this can be addressed with a very simple system of monitoring wells that can be inserted inexpensively when the rain garden is being built. Putting in some pipes underground will allow a scientist to sample the water that can be collected at different depths and can therefore determine whether the rain garden is cleaner than the water that entered it from the input. Another example of monitoring is looking at green roofs. Green roofs are largely done to reduce urban flooding and stormwater runoff, but they also have a potential to support biodiversity, in this case, pollinators. Yes, pollinators have a difficult time to find habitat in cities, but in green roofs, there's a great potential. But if we don't monitor it, then we don't know what species are coming and how many of those species are coming. So these examples illustrate a few different ways that scientists trap insects so that they can come back and identify those insects and collect data on how effective is the green roof to support pollinators. So I like to argue for a safe to fail transdisciplinary culture. And this includes scientists, very important to design the experiments, to define the parameters that will be examined, to develop protocols for data analysis. The design professionals are important for design leadership to get the community to understand these design experiments and to integrate monitoring into the projects. And finally, the stakeholders need to be involved. They can be involved to collect data. They can be involved through environmental education, through programs that raise community awareness. And the goal is ultimately to influence public policy, to change the rules and the policies of the government to promote the ideas that have been proven to work. I don't have time for that one. Okay. Make a habit of a safe to fail design strategy. I have said there's a limit to the place-specific design knowledge. The examples I showed you from New York City, from Seattle, from Berlin, Germany, are not going to be totally transferable to your situation in Mexico. You need Mexican solutions for Mexican problems in the Mexican environment. The goal is for innovation to deliver important urban ecosystem services, stormwater management, flood reduction, urban biodiversity, mitigating climate change. These are urban ecosystem services that are absolutely essential for resilience. So to do this, I propose pilot projects as designed experiments. And if the experiments have no risks, then they have a very low potential to discover something new, right? In order to think boldly and experimentally, there are some risks involved. Of course, we can't build a giant experiment that if it fails, it will have a big effect on the city. So we need to make these small experiments that are safe to fail. Okay, we don't want it to fail. We want to try something. We believe it works. But if it does fail, okay, we knew that was possible in the front, and it's not a catastrophe because of the failure. And these can be implemented everywhere, all the time. The scale of this is staggering. And then, of course, we want to communicate. We want to say, hey, look what we learned. We tried something new. It had a risk, but we did it. We collected the data, and we have learned from it, and now we have a new method. Here's an example, also in Seattle, for dealing with stormwater to protect the habitat for the salmon, which are the iconic fish that live in that part of the United States. They live in the ocean, but they swim upstream to spawn and to lay their eggs. And a lot of the problem with the urban streams had to do with urban drainage, which encouraged too rapid flow. Engineered drainage systems produce very high peak flows, very high velocities, and then after the rain stops, there's no water left in the stream, and the fish can't survive. So this was a small project for one street to change the paradigm. It's called the Street Edge Alternative. And this is the idea of thinking like a salmon. This is a perfect example of a safe to fail strategy. If it flooded, okay, there are 10 houses here that get flooded. Not a big deal. But it didn't flood, and it works. And the system, this is what it looked like before, a wide street with a lot of runoff. This is what it looked like after. A narrow street. It still has parking, but it has permeable paving, infiltration swales, native plants, and sidewalks. So here's a nice example of multifunctional benefits. Initially, only for stormwater, but it has these other benefits. And importantly, and the reason I can talk about this is because it was monitored. The University of Washington monitored it and found that it reduced annual runoff by 95%. So very, very successful for runoff control. It used native plants. One of the unexpected benefits was traffic calming. People who drive down the street go slower, so it's safer and it's nicer to walk on. It provides social benefits because the neighbors were involved in taking care of the native plants that were planted. And because this system was tested and proven, it's been widely adapted and applied across the city of Seattle and in many other cities in the United States. I think I'm going to have to skip this example. This is the example in Staten Island in New York City. This is the alternative urban drainage system. They made new, I won't skip it completely, but I'll go quickly over it. Instead of putting in a conventional engineered system, a system of created wetlands was made that can intercept the stormwater, slow the stormwater down in a wetland that looks like this, where the water the sediment can be removed, the contamination can be removed, and the flooding damage is reduced. Okay, so to close up on this safe to fail idea, this is a strategic approach to build urban resilience capacity. It's an emerging theory and strategy to think about sustainability and resilience in the context of urbanization. This idea says, okay, urbanization is happening. Urbanization will continue to happen. If we want the world and the city to be sustainable and resilient, the cities have to be a part of that solution. The concepts of resilience are well understood, and they have been applied successfully for a long time in natural resource management, mainly in fisheries, but they remain largely untried in urban design and urban planning. So this represents a huge opportunity for design and planning professionals because we understand design and construction of the built environment, and we can see ways to do things differently and better. But of course, we need to involve the transdisciplinary partners, the scientists, the decision makers, and the stakeholders. Okay, I think I have finished with enough time for some comments. I'm going to try to, how do I get out of here? End the show. Okay. End the show and stop. Oh, well, I want to stop my sharing, right? No.
We're fine, Professor
We're fine.
Ahern. Yes,
Okay, good.
yes. It's actually the projection has ended, so it's okay. Agradecemos al profesor Jack Ahern por la conferencia impartida e invitamos al público a expresar sus inquietudes sobre este tema utilizando el chat de la plataforma de las redes sociales, ya sea Facebook o YouTube. We thank you, Professor Ahern, for this lecture, this talk, very interesting talk, and we invite the public to express their concerns, comments, or any question they may have related to the lecture you just have providing using the chat room. And if I may, I will try to do my best in the translation of their comments. I have been reading, it's a very interesting lecture that you just have given to us. And obviously, it's a lot of questions and comments that has come to the mind of our guests. And I'm going to try to do my best to put it in English.
Yes,
So I apologize if in some way I do not translate correctly, but I'm trying to do my best, Professor. Y me disculpo de antemano con los presentes si de alguna manera yo genero alguna omisión a sus comentarios, pero estaré haciendo lo mejor posible en la traducción. Le saludan, I'm sorry, they thank you here in the chat. They thank you for this presentation. Dr. Jorge Redondo, Osvaldo Leiva, Dr. René Arreola. And there's this question from Dr. Osvaldo Leiva. He's one of our colleagues here at the faculty. And he says, in these times, we are in a transition process of our planning local regional system to a new modern model or something postmodern model in a somehow or some way of a mixed model of evolution of planning and development. He called it mixed scanning. In this context, how can we go forward to a resilient local management in a so damaged territory with an expansive urbanization? How could we coordinate spatially and temporarily these human actions into our territory?
Good question. Thank you. I would point to the idea of ecosystem services, which I mentioned briefly, but I'll speak a little bit about more now. Ecosystem services are the functions and services provided by the natural environment that people depend on. They are essential for human life as we know it. From the food that we eat, of course, comes from the environment, from plants and from animals. The air we breathe is cleaned by environment. Floodwaters are mitigated and managed by natural environments in the city. Climate change can be mitigated with vegetation in the cities. So by thinking in terms of ecosystem services, we can get very specific about why people should care about these things. It's about human survival. It's about human health. It's about economic health, and about kind of reminding people and helping them understand how we depend on the natural environment for these services, and then how the projects that we propose can maintain and deliver those services into the future. And this is one way to define urban sustainability, right? We need to have a certain level of ecosystem services. But if we think about, getting specific about those, how do we do that? For example, in a lot of American cities have developed bold plans to plant trees in the city. New York City planted 1 million trees. other cities have planted similar numbers of trees. Why? Because the trees provide multiple functions or ecosystem services. They slow down the rainfall and reduce flooding. They transpire moisture and reduce the urban heat island effect. They provide habitat for wildlife. They make the city more comfortable for people. They have economic benefits because the environment looks more attractive. So the simple idea of trees in the city, when you think about it in terms of ecosystem services, provides a lot of benefits, and then you get buy-in from people, because in the transdisciplinary world, that's one of the goals, is to have the stakeholders understand why is this being done and why should it be supported. So maybe, I don't know if you want to translate that or try.
I think they have understood
Okay.
everything, and I thank you for that. I actually wasn't taking notes, but I'm pretty sure professors and the people that has been pending into this conference, they'll get it fine. Thank you, Professor. There's this also comment from Dr. René Arriola, and he says, also the presence of rural irrigation canals that are getting eaten by the urban development of the cities are regularly seen as the backyards of this urban development. This vision has to be modified, from the point of view of the citizen, and also from those who take the decisions, from politics. Due to this idea, or they have the idea that this canals has to be covered, or put it underground and being on pipes, and with that, all the services that they provide has been lost in the possibilities of green areas or greenways.
Okay.
That's a comment of René Arriola. So this is a point of view of changing, the culture as well.
Yes.
Eloisa, she thanks you for your great presentation, and I thank her for writing this in English. And she says, Dr. Ahern, well, thank you, great for your presentation. My questions are: 1, in an arid landscape like it's Mexicali, what could be the ecosystem services most likely to contribute to urban resilience capacity? And as a second question, how can these ecosystem services be monitored? If you have an idea, or if you could, give an answer to Eloisa.
Yes. Good questions. First, I'll talk about the canal question or issue.
Okay.
This is a common policy around the world. It's an example of the old way of thinking about urban drainage, to use the drainage into pipes, put it underground, like the out of sight, out of mind idea. But we have learned that this system takes away all of the other benefits that canals on the surface can provide. So it's a mistake. Around the world, there are many examples of taking streams out of pipes. We call it daylighting, letting the stream see the daylight again. There's been a lot of this in Europe. There's been a lot of this in the United States. China is doing a lot of this now. If you want to look at a really bold proposal, it's called sponge cities. Sponge, to hold the water, sponge cities. So this is the idea of looking at the cities through the lens of water, and to say, how can we get the water into the soil, not to run away, to infiltrate the stormwater, because it will regenerate the groundwater, it will feed the stream flow, it will reduce flooding, it will provide all of these benefits, and it does this in a safe to fail way. So and also the book my book that I included in the presentation that I was a co-author of, Water-Centric Sustainability for Cities. The whole book is about this idea, about thinking about urban sustainability from the perspective of water. And it involves other thinking, including a lot of innovative ideas about recycling. The nutrients that are found in runoff can sometimes be reused for productive uses for agriculture, for example, or for irrigation, to take the polluted water, use it for irrigation. It cleans up the water and it provides irrigation. So there's a lot of innovative thinking about how to use the water. The other question about the arid landscapes is a good one. I haven't really lived in an arid environment, but of course I'm aware of the challenges. I believe vegetation still has an important role. Certainly in parts of the city, it should be possible to grow trees, and those trees will provide important functions. If not trees, then using the worst thing to use is turf grass that requires irrigation. That's what the Americans did in the West, and that's why Mexico gets no water from the Colorado River anymore, because we use it all for not only for landscape irrigation but for agriculture. So the water is precious. The water needs to be very carefully monitored and managed. The rainfall in most arid environments, there is rainfall. Of course, a small amount, that's the definition. And it often comes in intense, small storms that create a large amount of runoff and flooding. So that becomes a stormwater management challenge, to capture that stormwater on the roofs of buildings, in bioswales and rain gardens, in infiltration areas, in other types of underground infiltration. So that's kind of the short answer, is to respect the water even more in the urban environment, and to try to capture it. San Francisco had a beautiful program some time ago. It was called Start at the Source. San Francisco is a Mediterranean, somewhat arid climate, and they, in this program, if you Google that, Start at the Source, you'll find a very beautiful and very simple program that shows how, even in a very urban environment, the stormwater can be infiltrated into the ground, and that produces a lot of ecosystem services. And how do you monitor it? I would start with the water, monitoring the amount of precipitation, monitoring the quality of the water, monitoring the groundwater, measure the capacity of some of these systems to infiltrate water. Another good resource for monitoring is produced by the Landscape Architecture Foundation, LAF. It's if you go to the website laf.org and look for Landscape Performance Series. This is a research they have been sponsoring for many years on monitoring of green infrastructure and other innovative programs. And this is free. It's on the web. It's available. I'm sure there are case studies from urban areas in the American Southwest. that you can learn from for examples of how this has been done and how it's been monitored. But this whole program is important because it's changing the professional culture. Previously, designers, they didn't want to know if their project worked because they were afraid, oh, maybe it doesn't work. So nobody wanted to pay for monitoring. Why should we pay for monitoring? It might show that it doesn't work. True, but that's not a responsible way to be a professional. So the new monitor, that's the safe to fail idea. Okay, this is experimental. It could fail, but it's a small project. It also has a potential for a high reward. And the whole thing depends upon innovation and monitoring. And then, of course, some intelligent reflection on what you learned and is it a better way to do things and can that help in the future? So I hope I answered that question. I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. And with that, complete answer you just gave us, it also answers some other comment that has Professor Osvaldo Leiva, which mentions about it's an arm of a river that we have in the city, within the city, that has been enclosed. So, I think this covers that information that he was requesting, for you to answer. So I'm going to follow with and mention one of the part of his comments that says, if you could have an idea of how to promote a cultural participation of the community and the involvement in this environmental area, which obviously goes beyond the management problems, with the social and the economics. Do you have an idea? Have you had in your experience anything like this?
Say the question a little more. I didn't quite get the question.
He would like to know if you have an idea, how could this be solved, the cultural participation of the community?
Okay, good. Good question. It's very important to get the community involved. That's a part of the definition of sustainability, right? If the people in the community don't understand it and support it, then it has failed, right? It needs to be understood by people so that they will support this and provide funding to take care of it and to keep doing the right thing. I think the best strategy for this is communication and reliable information. So again, in the old days of green thinking and green building, it was a little bit like, trust me, this is going to be beautiful. It's going to be very green, but no data because no monitoring was done. So now we say, this is the idea of evidence-based decision making, right? So we want to know, do the street trees reduce the temperature in the city? Does the rain garden improve the water quality? And when we can collect the data, now we have a very strong argument that can be supported with scientific facts, right? We can argue the science, but ultimately the truth should come out. And if the systems work, and if they're proven to work, then we have a basis for outreach to the community. And then, so communication is one part of that. Education is another part. If the community can start with school children, right, with environmental education, children should be involved in planting rain gardens and counting pollinators and all of these things. That's one strategy, right, for the long term, for the future. You help these students to understand this as they're learning, and then they grow up with it and they can support it. Also having hardcore engineering data that can be debated with the engineers. Engineers will respect the data, and if they want to do things the old way, to put the streams into pipes, then we need to document, well, that can actually increase flooding, and it can decrease water quality, and it doesn't provide any of the positive benefits that we're looking for to regenerate the stormwater and provide habitat for other species. So the basis of my answer is, it's again monitoring data, being honest, being realistic, and then using that to educate with the goal of getting people to buy in and support the proposal.
Yes, correct. I'm going to try to be real brief on this 3 more comments. And one of them, it's from Dr. Jorge Arredondo. And he mentions of this long way to go still here in Mexico. And this due to the one that it's called the specialist, the professional in the area, that actually they do not believe and do not accept, what is in reality the planning, with this focus in their minds. This is something he mentioned that at the program of Master and Doctorate in Planning and Sustainable Development, we're trying to work with, to change that mentality, as you mentioned in your lecture, that it's this change of thinking. And one of the areas or the group of people that he believes that has made this problem to prevail is the ones who does the real estate, because urbanization has to be the priority no matter what. And yes, they obviously the green areas does not make a monetary income to there. So he mentions that, and I appreciate his comment. Also, another student from the program, he mentions that if you have an idea, and this all comes, along with what you have been mentioning throughout the lecture, if you have an idea, how could be, let me read, do you think will be a solution, or do you think that there will be a solution for implementing an experiment project with a low or lower budget?
Yes. Okay. So two questions there. The first one, I think, was about how to argue for the benefits of open space when the politics are not supporting that. And again, I would not go to the emotional argument that it's good to be green, it's nice to be green. Okay, that kind of an argument works with some people, but not with people who are opposed to the green. And so then you kind of use their own thinking to convince them. The economics, right? There's very good research that has proven around the world that open space in cities increases public health. Okay, well, why should people care about that? Well, they should care about it, but even if they don't care about it, you say, well, guess what? Poor public health costs the society a lot of money, right? When people don't get exercise, when people are unhappy, when people are unhealthy, they're not productive, and the society has to pay to take care of them. So the public health argument with open space, I think, is a strong one. And I know in Europe, they're doing a lot of research on this, as we speak, progressive research on the public health benefits of open space. Recently, China has released a program that recognizes that public parks in cities are really necessary and they need more of them. And it's the new argument. It's the argument about the public health and the other benefits. It's also a little more, there's the mental health, right? When people are happy and healthy, they're more productive in the society and they contribute more to the economy. So it's a virtuous, good cycle that starts with the green space. It's also good for the cities because when you have an attractive city, you get more intelligent people who want to come and work there. You get companies and businesses that want to come there because it's a good quality of life for their employees. So, and increasingly the industries are recognizing this and requiring it. And they're locating in places that have a good quality of life for people because it pays economic benefits back to them. In terms of the budget for safe to fail experiments, another great question. And it's always a challenge and always a problem. So I would encourage thinking small, right? Every time a road is repaved, every road in a city has to be repaved every 20 or 30 years, right? Okay, so we have to pay for that. No arguing. We have to do that. But how often do we experiment with new materials to pave the road? So what if we take 2% of the project? The project already has the funding. We take a very modest amount. We do a little pilot project and including monitoring money, and we can learn from that. So kind of setting the goal very low so that we can get some small successes behind us, some successes to build from. Also, involving citizens is another way to save money on these experiments. The idea of citizen science, people can collect data. They can go out and take water quality samples. They can count birds and insects. They can observe how people use it. So there's some ways to save money with public involvement as well.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm going to take a little break just to announce to the students, those who are going to be presenting to their research updates. Por favor, alumnos del programa de Maestría y Doctorado en Planeación y Desarrollo Sustentable, se les recuerda que, así también a los directores de tesis y evaluadores, que pueden pasar a la sala de Google Meet, que se les proporcionó el enlace en el programa para que puedan estar en tiempo y forma en estas presentaciones. Asimismo, se les recuerda que esta conferencia está siendo grabada por si ustedes consideran pertinente, regresar y mirar el final de los comentarios. Muchas gracias y continúo con el profesor Jack Ahern. Okay, sorry about that, Professor. It's probably I think basically those are all of the comments, and it's just a little, I would say it's a little joke that one of our professors made here, a statement that it says that the only green that the politicians like is the one that they see in their wallets, and in their bank accounts, differently is not so much fun when they talk about greening. So one more question here, and this is from Karina Garduño. Well, he congratulates you for this lecture and all the comments that you have given to us this morning. And she says, what would be, do you think, and I know that you have mentioned about this, the problems for Mexico has to be solved as Mexican problems and not taking in consideration whatever other countries or continent has been done. But she says, what do you think that what would be the first step for Mexico to give the necessary importance to ecological systems as a means to achieve the sustainability?
Okay. big challenge, right? When you're trying to change the culture in such a big way. Obviously, the role of professionals and researchers is important, and I believe that's a lot of the people in the audience are students, and they will be the future professionals and researchers. So that's we're headed in that direction. I'll go back to the same idea of communicating with data and information, and trying to build a culture in the professions. The American engineering profession, when I was in graduate school, the engineers were the bad guys. They were the ones who wanted to put all the pipes under the streets, and they were fighting back against any kind of alternatives. But guess what? They lost, because the alternative systems work. They can save money. They can be built for less money. So there's the green in the wallets. So that's, the research isn't just about counting insects. It's also about counting dollars that are spent on infrastructure and demonstrating that it works. And, this is why China is embracing the Sponge City program, because it works and it saves money. It's the only reason that the idea of green infrastructure is so popular. If we had to say, you should do green infrastructure because it's the right thing to do and it's good for the environment, good luck, right? It doesn't work. Sorry, I have bigger problems. I have a budget. When you can tell them that, look, your infrastructure provides this service. It reduces flooding. It moves the water across the city. Okay, that has to be done. Here's a different way to do it. And look at this. It costs less money and it works better. So with these kind of arguments backed up with data that's not collected from Europe or from China or from the US, but from Mexico, you can start to prove this with real science. And again, I'll just mention the Landscape Architecture Foundation, the Landscape Performance Series. A great example of this. They took this on 10 or 15 years ago, and they're changing the culture and they're changing the dialogue. And now they have a big library of information that anybody in any city in the US can point to and say, look at this. Here's what they did in San Antonio. Here's what they did in New Mexico. In other cities, they can point to that and really start to change the discussion beyond the old way of doing things. So the budget, think small, but try to do the monitoring. And then when you have the success, you really need to communicate it, not only in scientific publications, but to the public, because those are the people who will make the votes and who will ultimately support these ideas.
Exactly, and use a real colloquial language, for everyone to everyone, because this solving solutions or problem solving solutions is for all of us, not just for the scientific, not just for the politicians, not just for the people who does the urban development, but to everyone. So I do agree with that. And I thank you, Professor, once again for this so important, illustrative, and magnificent to me presentation that you has given to us at this virtual event. And obviously to all of the attendants for their enthusiastic participation, all the comments. I'm gonna make sure, Professor, that you will get all these comments, so you could, and also to have their emails in case that you will, try to continue with this type of communication. Nuevamente agradecemos a la participación del profesor Ahern por su distinguida presencia, su tan ilustrativa e importante conferencia que nos acaba de dar el día de hoy en este evento virtual, y sobre todo, y quienes hacen posible que esto se lleve a cabo, a los participantes con sus comentarios y sus preguntas. Y bueno, en apego a esta condición de virtualidad y de la manera más fraternal que se pueda, damos constancia de la participación al profesor Ahern en este evento a través de la siguiente constancia, que a la letra dice, Professor, in accordance to this condition of virtuality in the most fraternal way, we would like to give a proof of your participation in this event through the present diploma. And once again, I apologize for reading this only in English.
No problem.
Thank you. Por favor, un poquito para abajo. Oh, muy bien. Un poco más grande
Very
para
nice.
poderla leer. Un poquito más. Disculpen mi ceguera. Gracias. El programa de Maestría y Doctorado en Planeación y Desarrollo Sustentable otorga la presente constancia al doctor Jack Ahern por su valiosa participación como ponente magistral con el tema Strategies for Building Urban Resilience en el marco del Coloquio de Avances de Investigación 2021-1, evento académico multidisciplinar e internacional celebrado de manera virtual el día 18 de junio de 2021, publicado a través de la plataforma de Facebook y YouTube de la Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño de la UABC. Firma el doctor Alejandro José Peinberg Duarte, director de la Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño, Universidad Autónoma de Baja California, Mexicali, Baja California, México. Finalmente agradecemos a la coordinación de posgrados de la FAD, a la doctora Angélica Castro a través del programa de actividades culturales de la FAD y por supuesto a todos los presentes quienes hicieron posible este evento y enviamos un abrazo a la distancia y quedamos en este programa de posgrado de Maestría y Doctorado en Planeación y Desarrollo Sustentable, siempre con nuestras puertas abiertas para sus amables consideraciones. Y como dice nuestro eslogan, ampliando las fronteras de la sustentabilidad. Muchas gracias nuevamente a todos. Se les recuerda que la conferencia ha sido grabada para consulta de ustedes en la plataforma de YouTube y de Facebook de la Facultad de Arquitectura y Diseño. Muchas gracias por su amable atención. Thank you once again, Professor Ahern. I'm pretty sure we're going to be in contact, and I'm hoping that we can probably in the future, near future, we can arrange a visit, a present visit in our school. Thank you once again. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Very good.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to share these ideas, and I hope it's been helpful, and I look forward to see the comments. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Adios.
Adios.